Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Midnight's Edge, and we're back again discovering films. Usually we do Bond at this time, but it came to our attention that, Andre, you've been a naughty boy. You have not seen Highlander.
This is true. I had not. Or actually, to be more specific, or to be more accurate, I had seen Highlander once before. Problem was, I saw it when I was way, way too young. I think I was, 8, 9, something like that. Whatever it was, I was too young to appreciate the movie. I was old enough to even think back then that this is like some weird aged 80s stuff. And I only remember some bits and pieces, like sword fight in the garage and stuff like that. And that's pretty much it. So then it's something that I've been meaning to rewatch. But it was never such a high priority that I actually went forth and did it. Not until we had these recent news announcement that a remake is happening again, this time with Henry Cavill attached. So we'll see if it actually happens this time. Right. And it was in the making of this video that Tom learned that I actually haven't seen it, or practically haven't seen it. And he was shocked and horrified at this discovery. I've been scolded for it every single day since. And so it came to pass that we are doing the inverse thing of what we're doing with the Bond series, that Tom is the one who hasn't seen. Now it's me that practically hasn't seen Highlander. So this video will be hearing what I have to say about it, seeing it practically for the first time, as well as, of course, discussing the history behind Highlander, the making of the movie, the franchise, and where it all goes from here. And to those of you wondering, the Critical Drinker will be joining us soon. We're just waiting for him to get good and drunk first.
I love when the drinker is drunk. By the way, he did a fantastic, all of his videos are fantastic, but he did a fantastic video on Highlander, last couple days?
Yeah, that was awesome. I loved when he just cut the camera and got off in his kilt.
It's so good. It's so good.
I guess he told me that I was kind of the impetus or whatever for that, because I reached out to him about what we're doing right now. And he's like, yeah, I was just thinking about it, and I did that video, and it's just like, okay, well, that's cool, But I loved it, yeah, and because part of it was I brought up to him that, as we'll get into later, should Highlander be remade, because I might as well do the intro now that I finally got it uploaded. As we know, there can be only one, right?
There can be only one.
Welcome, Mr. Critical Drinker. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Oh, we're doing all right. We got a little bit started earlier than we had planned because of Andre's schedule, but we're glad to have you here. And we also have Robert Meyer Burnett here as well. How are you doing?
It's another honor to be streaming with all of you. And, fantastic.
And as before I did my late intro there, because it took forever to load up, we were just discussing your new video, Critical Drinker, and how you say that Highlander does not need a remake.
Yes, yeah, very much so. If it had been in a different climate, I would have said, well, okay, you could maybe do something with this, because you can absolutely improve upon the sword fights, this special effects and all that sort of thing. But I just know that they would absolutely screw it up if they were to do it today. You just couldn't make a movie like Highlander again. And to be honest, I wouldn't want them to really anyway. I think the movie has just got so much charm. It's a fun movie, and even things like the dodgy special effects, they just add to it for me. So yeah, I'm just totally happy with it as it is, to be honest with you. I wouldn't really want to see it remade.
I also have to agree with you, because I consider Highlander a film that was shaped by the cinematic aesthetics that were sort of permeating Hollywood movies in the 80s that were brought about because of music videos. And if you think about certain films like The Hunger or Streets of Fire or even Flashdance, these are movies, in terms of the way they were shot and the way they were edited, were heavily influenced by music videos. And Russell Mulcahy, the director of Highlander, really came to prominence doing Duran Duran videos, beginning with their album Rio, in which he was directing. And I think that there was an aesthetic that was sort of percolating, and it was being refined of that time. And I consider maybe Highlander to be the peak of that 80s music video aesthetic, from the way it was shot to the way it was edited, to also obviously the Queen score, which was such a big part of it. I mean, that bombast. I mean, it's almost like the way Meatloaf songs and videos worked. And I don't know if there's anybody even capable today of making a film that can combine those elements. I think they'll try and do something entirely different, which means what I worried about if they do a remake of Highlander is it would be more of a conventional fantasy film.
Yes.
And part of the charm of this, like the drinker said, is the bombast, and is the, like, when the animation of the lightning effects. I mean, it looks like
I miss those 80s lightning effects where you can properly see the bolts. Like, you know, the bit I always point to is like when the Kurgan and Ramirez are duking it out in the castle, and the walls are collapsing around them, and there's fucking lightning strikes going around, and like you can see that the sky behind them is just a matte painting. Yeah, but I absolutely don't care. It just makes it so much more awesome for me just to see stuff like that, rather than some, soulless CGI effect that you could obviously put in that would be a million times more like realistic looking. It just wouldn't be as fun.
No, I agree. And those were handcrafted effects. They were optically printed. You had literally different
animation
pieces of film. Yeah, and there was an aesthetic there. And when you think about lightning effects, I mean, there were lightning effects when the Terminator first shows up in '84, and you have those animated lightning effects happening when the time bubble opens up, and it's great. And Highlander had that same quality of lightning effect that Terminator had, and it wasn't a big budget lightning effect. It was not ILM and like the Ark of the Covenant being open, and you have the lightning on the little island. It's a different quality. And I miss that because it felt crafted by people.
Well, as we were kind of saying, obviously myself, the drinker, and Robert are big fans of the film, and that was part of the reason to bring this together. But the biggest reason, as we were getting to, was Andre hadn't seen it, and it's considering what Midnight's Edge is all about. I mean, when you think of Midnight's Edge, you think of stuff like Conan, He-Man. Highlander is right in that purview, right? Like, I mean, like I said to him, like, how are you not a fan? And you said to me, Andre,
I haven't really seen it.
Well,
look at the disappointment in Critical Drinker's face.
Have you not seen it?
How have you not seen it?
It won the Academy Award for Best Movie Ever Made. So, how can you argue with that?
I think that's according to Will Ferrell, I believe. So, like, that's it's got to be true.
Yeah. But yeah, like we were saying, it's got that real 80s charm, and that's the thing you couldn't really replicate nowadays. The big bombastic soundtrack by Queen, the sort of, slightly amateurish but really charming special effects, like the overacting from Clancy Brown, and man, it's just it's really fun.
And also the filmmaking itself is not necessarily perfect. There's continuity issues and editorially, and even the cuts when there's explosions when they're at the Silver Cup Studios on the rooftops. It's not as slick as we're used to today.
Well, we even saw a shorter cut here in the U.S. for many, many years, Robert, as you know, because they cut 8 minutes out of the fucking movie before they brought it over here.
Yeah.
And speaking of Mulcahy, I mean, I think even though you mentioned he did Duran Duran, it needs to be mentioned that he was the guy who directed the first video that ever premiered on MTV, which was Video Killed the Radio Star.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, he had done a lot of Queen stuff up to that point too, that's where the connection came with Queen. But I'm sure we'll get into all that as well. But yeah, I think Mulcahy is really the key here. And I think that's what they were missing beyond that. In part 2, I mean, he was there, but we'll get into that. That wasn't his fault.
No.
But the reason we're here is because Andre finally watched Highlander proper. And now he said with a little asterisk, as he said, he had seen it when he was younger, but as you were saying, Andre, you saw it at the wrong time.
Yes, that's true. I saw it too early to appreciate it. Whereas now, when I saw it actually yesterday for the first time, when I saw it proper, so it's like always interesting because you see a movie that by now is incredibly dated. Actually, it was dated when I saw it the first time.
It was dated when it came out.
When I saw it the first time, I thought it was, whoa, this is like some weird 80s stuff. It looks like the Terminator, which was from 1984. But what I will say is that to me, it has that 80s charm. It has the same aesthetic as something that Michael Mann would make. It has the same kind of aesthetic that you saw in Miami Vice and in Manhunter, which is also a Michael Mann movie. So I think it's like that aesthetic, very 80s choice of colors with the very prolific red and the greens and that contrast there. Heavy, much dark, much blackness. But what I thought was really compelling beyond just the 80s aesthetic was the way that it was filmed. Because as we say in our earlier video, is that the director, he came from music videos, and you can totally tell, because that was one thing that struck me. I have seen this kind of aesthetic before, but I have never seen a movie with that kind of aesthetic filmed in this kind of way.
And there's definite shots that are like, yep, that's like they were just lined up for a big hero shot, like right at the end where Connor has defeated the Kurgan and he stood in front of all those glass panels. And, he's just there, like, it's like he's on stage about to do an act or something, and you're just waiting for it to happen, and then boom, they all start exploding behind him. I mean, it looks cool as fuck, but yeah, it's very obviously staged to give you that great composition.
Yeah. Well, speaking of music videos, that's what Mulcahy really did, was he brought not just the editing style, but a lot of the camera work that they did, because they hadn't been using that stuff in movies. That opening shot and that shot that Drinker was just talking about are done with those wire rig cameras that they use now in sporting events all the time. Nobody had used that shit before in movies.
That was amazing. Like those wire rig cameras, that was incredible. And what actually impressed me the most were the transitions from current day back to Scotland, to the Scottish Highland. Just those transitions, the way that they were done, not like a complete transition, but part of the screen. You see, for instance, you go into a shade, and then that shade is where the transition happens.
Or a white.
And then you zoom in on that, and then you're in the new thing. That was amazing. That is possibly the best transitions I've ever seen. So I was really amazed with that.
Well, there's a couple of transitions that I obviously used video effects for, but it still works, like zooming into Connor's eye.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, that was a good one because it just worked. And I don't think that they were dated at all. I mean, much of the effect work is, of course, really dated with what they can do. I also thought it was like interesting because you have like a very strong sword and sorcery vibe in there. I saw like some Conan references. And as you mentioned, Tom, it was all, this really struck me after the first fight when our hero has beheaded his first victim of the movie, and he sucks out his power. That was the He-Man sequence.
Yeah.
All that was needed was him holding aloft his sword and saying, "By the power of Grayskull," because all the power left all the surroundings and came into him just that way. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, the quickening,
you've got to love that first fight, by the way. Like this dude who he's fighting, like when you look at the actor, like a kind of out of shape middle-aged guy in a suit, then it cuts to like the long shots of like a stuntman doing backflips and stuff. It's like that is clearly not the same man, my friend.
Yeah, this movie has to be chalked up for the worst stand-ins for all this actors.
But you know,
because most of the sword fights and well, the fight scenes in general are they're very like slow and very clumsy, and I think some of that is because guys like Christopher Lambert had notoriously awful eyesight, and
he actually has a
basically
disorder.
Couldn't see the people he was swinging at, so they had to be really careful he didn't actually decapitate someone.
Yeah, he actually had a disorder, I guess. I can't remember the name of it, but it's gotten worse over the years.
It's extreme myopia.
That's it. That's it.
So it's ordinary nearsightedness. He just has such an extreme version of it that he's practically blind.
Well, now,
apparently, like when they were doing the horseback scenes, like when the Highlanders are going into battle, he'd like ride over the hill, but he'd still be wearing his glasses because he'd forgotten to take them off.
Yeah, and I guess now it's so bad, like he's almost practically blind. But like he almost, I think he chipped Clancy Brown's tooth or something in one of the scenes.
Right.
And he said he was more worried about, I seen an interview where he's talking about he was more worried about the choreography, getting that down, than he was learning his lines. Because for those who don't know, when he first did the first movie, he couldn't speak a lick of English. He did all his lines phonetically because he couldn't understand any of it. But he was more worried about that because he's like, once my glasses are off, I could kill somebody. Like if I'm not doing it just right, because I can't see nothing. And these guys were scared, and rightfully so. And they wanted to make sure I got it done right because he couldn't see a damn thing when he was doing it, which is scary.
No wonder no one wanted to fight him in the Scottish Highlands.
There's something also that I think this movie has a sincerity to it. Mulcahy is a director and the actors and everybody, they were committed to this film. It's not like you never get the idea. Unfortunately, you watch any movie that Bruce Willis is in, he's laconic. He's just sleepwalking through a role. He's here for a couple of days, and it detracts from the film. An actor doesn't want to be there, but in this film, everyone is so committed to what's happening on screen, and it really becomes infectious when you watch it. Like anytime Clancy Brown's on screen, that guy. And I know that he didn't make the deals that other actors made. So he said he's been honest saying that I didn't get rich off this movie. But there's not one moment where the Kurgan is on screen where you feel that this guy's phoning it in. He is absolutely committed to his role. And
he's having a blast. Yeah,
he's having a blast. And it becomes infectious. And that was something I think when we think back to like the 80s movies like Commando, and you had Vernon Wells from the Road Warrior, a guy like him absolutely committed, or Michael Ironside, whenever he was chewing the scenery as a villain. These were actors that they never thought to themselves, well, I'm Shakespearean trained and I'm supposed to be somewhere else. No, these people committed to what they were doing, which is what made these movies so much fun to watch. And
I think my favorite Kurgan moment is when he's been dueling some guy in an alleyway and he's killed him and he's had the quickening, so all the stuff's exploded. Then he leaps into a car, like pulls out the driver, and there's like a little old lady in the car with him, and he just looks over and goes, "Mom!"
I love that.
He's just like screaming.
Mom.
He's just an absolute shithead to everybody he deals with. It's great.
It's great. It's great.
I got something to say.
Yeah,
it's better to burn out than to fade away.
I love how in that church scene as well, he shaved his head and he's like, "I'm in disguise." Like, you blend right in, mate. Well done. Nobody will recognize you now.
And I think Mario Van Peebles never gets enough credit for chewing it up in the third film either.
Yeah. No,
I
thought he did a great job in that one.
I do not know to which movie you are referring, and I think so does neither does The Drinker by the look of him. There's only this one movie, isn't there?
Yeah, I don't know what you guys are on about.
I'm sorry.
Before we
knew when to end it, you see.
So here's the thing. Okay, like let's get into everybody's introduction besides Andre, because Andre hasn't seen the film before we get too far into it. Drinker, when did you first see and get introduced to Highlander?
I think it was quite late on for me. Like I probably watched it with my dad when I was a little kid, but kind of forgot about it and had just had like that hazy recollection of like, oh yeah, there was this weird thing that was in like, ancient times and New York as well. And then it wasn't till I think like I was in high school or something. One of my friends mentioned it and they're like, oh, it was really good fun. It's going to be on like tomorrow night or something. And then I watched it then and I was like, oh, cool, this is awesome. And it just brought back all those memories of like that kind of half forgotten movie from when I was a little kid. And then it just really always had good recollections of it since then. And yeah, the more I think about it now compared to the kind of movies we get nowadays, the more it just makes me happy that that film got made, you know?
Yeah, I have one question for you, Drinker, because you're obviously Scottish, and there's a big Scottish element to this movie right here. But one thing that struck me, and this is the same thing that you said in your video, which by the way is excellent and that everyone should check out.
Really good.
Was that what a casting we got here? You have the most Scottish actor of all Scottish actor, and he's playing a Spanish Egyptian, whereas the Scottish Highlander. He's played by a Frenchman who can barely speak English, let alone Scottish. How was the reception to his attempt at Scottish accent?
I mean, I don't know how people in general embraced it. Like, it's funny to listen to now. Like, there's a very specific like Hollywood version of Scottish accents that always seems to crop up, and it's like they always roll their R's. And they always pronounce everything very precisely. And it's nothing like how real people speak. But then I can overlook it because, one, it's a Frenchman trying to do a Scottish accent who couldn't even speak English. And two, it's set in like the 14th century or something. So who knows how people spoke back then? Maybe it was like that.
Chances are they were talking such deep, like, what is it, Gaelic or whatever is the...
Yeah, Gaelic. Yeah. So if you were up in the Highlands, you would be speaking Gaelic.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't have been able to understand a word they've been saying here.
Yeah. I love Sean Connery as well, because he has about 2 lines where he tries to do a sort of half Spanish accent, and then he's just like, "Oh, fuck it, so I'm going to just talk like Sean Connery again," and then he just goes back to his regular accent for the rest of the movie. It's great.
Yeah, kind of like when he was a Russian U-boat captain.
Great
Scottish accent.
Yeah.
No, because like as a Norwegian, I find that fascinating because whenever you have a Hollywood movie that's trying to do a Norwegian accent, it either is something that sounds Swedish, like Hollywood Swedish, not actual Swedish accent, but what Hollywood thinks a Swedish accent is like, or full-on Russian. It's like typically one of those two. And not the lame accent that it really, really is. And then, of course, let's not forget the one time when we had Swedish actor Max von Sydow play one of our own great authors in a Norwegian movie, playing a Norwegian, speaking his own native Swedish throughout. That was weird. So yeah, I just find that amusing or interesting.
Well, and I know Connery did help a little bit with like some of the, like there's a couple of words and a few other things that Lambert does that he helped him out with. But what's funny is he doesn't do any accent in the first movie, but in the third movie he does attempt to do that Scottish accent, or third or fourth one, and it's bad.
Well, what's interesting is, and obviously it was intentional to give the guy a break, but like when you see him in the Highland scenes, you know, in the 15th century, he's obviously got the really strong Scottish accent there, or like his version of it. But when you flash forward to New York, he's lost it, which kind of makes sense. You would over time gradually lose your accent and just absorb whatever accent you're around.
Yeah, that was kind of would have been in the States for the past 300 years. I mean, because that's one thing that I really liked, that he looks at first glance as a poor man. When you first see him at that wrestling match. So, and when I saw that, I was like first thinking, my God, like you've been around here for centuries, and this is all you've been able to amass. But then, of course, you later learn that he's obviously hyper wealthy. He has like this amazing building in this antique store. So he's obviously done pretty well for himself. And then you learn how, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Kurgan, however, he was better at wasting his time, it seems.
I was always wondering, what did he do through the centuries?
Just killing people left, right, and center.
I think that was kind of build up. Was like he was off killing all the other immortals. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but what was he like? Did he ever enjoy like a nice French bistro, maybe in Paris?
I think
Having
that
a nice
he enjoys
bottle of
other
wine.
things.
I gotta imagine he was hanging out with like Genghis Khan, and then he moved on to the next, to the next, to the next. Yeah,
I love that scene where the prostitute comes into his room and she's like, "I'm Candy." You just hear him go, "Of course you are.
Of course you are."
The Kurgan enjoys the finer things in life. Clearly,
He certainly does.
Yeah.
Churches.
He does enjoy the finer things, absolutely. It's just that his definition of finer things may vary, and evidently does not require doing something with your life, amassing a fortune or anything like that. If anything, he's the more
Conan-like about this, though.
Yeah, he's the more Conan-like one. Yeah, sorry, you were saying.
When it comes to Connor and his character, like the movie's kind of honest about how being alive for so long and having witnessed so much would affect you. And so when you see him at this wrestling match and then, you know, mooching around his apartment and stuff, he just seems like a tired man. Like he's tired of life because he's seen everything and done everything, I would imagine, in the hundreds of years he's been around. And he's got no zest for life anymore. He's just very like cynical and burned out and disinterested in other people. And I think that's probably kind of accurate to how that would affect a person's sanity for having lived so long,
right?
You know,
and also any ties you have with other human beings are just going to drift away at some point. They're going to age and die, and you have to pretend at some point that, or either leave them so they don't understand you're immortal. And I year after year, century after century, I think that would destroy one's soul.
Yeah, well, Ramirez talks about that, how, you know, he'd been married several times in his life, and like the last time it happened, like obviously every time his wife had grown old and died and he was stuck being the same age. And he said, like, the last time it absolutely broke me and I just couldn't do it anymore. And I had to, you know, I had to avoid letting anyone get close to me. And I'd advise you to do the same.
Right.
Connor doesn't listen to him. And you actually get that, you know, that montage of him living an entire life with Heather,
right,
you know, his wife at the time, and it's over very quick. It's just a couple of minutes, but it tells you everything you need to know. You get to see them having their brief spell of happiness, both being young and content, and then, you know, she grows old and she's struggling to even like you know, walk uphill towards their house, and then she passes away, not understanding why he's never aged.
Well, she kind of knows, but.
Well, yeah, but like I guess, you know, it's.
She only knows to the extent that he knows, which means she knows nothing at all. Because he only got the awareness when he won the prize.
She was around when Ramirez was teaching him and stuff here and there, but like that one conversation they did have in private, kind of. No, but like that's kind of the point of the whole story, and that's what broke the back of the story when the original script was written, funnily enough, because the original story was much more darker and dour, and it had no prize, there was no Heather. It was just basically about Connor just, you know, going through life, like you said, just kind of depressed that he's got to live forever and watching everybody die off in front of him. And, you know, and then finally the Kurgan shows up and they just fight, and that's it. There's that was the original script. It was when they decided, look, if you're living forever, how many wives have you gone through? Like Robert just said, how many friends have you watched die, or you've had to just, you know, sever with just because you'd have to tell them this secret. And that's where the story finally came together. And then they added the whole point of the prize, and that really broke it open, of like the drawing of everybody together, making, you know, Connor more of a tragic figure because he doesn't want to do this shit. He doesn't want this life, but he's still stuck with it. And being that whole thing that you just said, like, you know, Ramirez was right. You're going to suffer for the rest of the time if you keep doing this to yourself. And that's kind of the tragedy of Connor's life. And that's where we meet him in the beginning. And he's just kind of, you know, trying not to be friends with anybody. He doesn't have very many ties in life. He's, you know, a loner. The only one he has is what's her face? The
Rachel.
Rachel, yeah.
Rachel, yeah.
That's really the only person
in his life that doesn't get much screen time, but it's such an interesting concept that she obviously knows the full truth about him, and she knows that sooner or later he's going to have to disappear and all the rest of it, and she's prepared for that. Yeah. But yeah, what a cool little character that's just probably I'd like to have known more about her actually and what she did after this.
Well, she goes from a daughter to a mother figure.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, another thing
great about her, yeah.
Another thing that I really like that it's only touched on a little bit, like when they get to New York, when you see that, you know, Connor and these immortals, they all know each other and they're friends. You know, Connor has immortal friends that he talks to, like, hey man, how's it going? We all know that we've come to New York to kill each other. And yet, moving through the centuries, these guys have known one another and they like one another, other than the Kurgan. And they have like good relationships because they're the only people that really understand the plight of one another. Like, what is it like to go through the centuries? And I really like that. There's that one scene, I guess it's in Central Park, when Connor is talking to his buddy who's shown up, and they know they're gonna have to kill each other, but they like each other. There's a camaraderie there, and I would love to have seen maybe a little bit more of that. Like, we get a lot of like the funny scene where you see Connor in like 17th century France when he's having to duel some lord.
That's great. That scene.
The guy's
assaulted his wife.
He gets run through like a dozen times, and then eventually he's just like, "Okay, I'm sorry."
And he's obviously hammered drinker. He's drank a lot, and he's wasted, and it's just. And I like those scenes really add to the enjoyment factor of this movie. Like when you get a little bit of what was it like to be an immortal in the past, and I thought that scene was a really clever, interesting, hilarious scene that humanizes Connor and makes him like, well, yeah, this is absurd. Sometimes being an immortal puts you in these kinds of situations, and I did like that element because I think that these guys, if you're immortal, if you're a man or a woman and you're immortal and you have like a group of immortals, you're going to put off trying to cut their heads off for as long as you can.
Well,
and I think you wonder, like, I know that the movie never really needs to explore this, but say the Kurgan had been killed off early on, and the last remaining immortals were all good guys like Connor,
right?
Who didn't necessarily want to fight each other. What would happen? Would they just carry on forever, or would they somehow feel compelled to fight each other eventually?
Well, that's kind of the point, is they are compelled. But like Eldritch says here, I was going to bring up, they do get into a lot more of the camaraderie and the relationships in the series, which is great.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. But they do kind of point out that there is kind of like two different kind of immortals. There's the darker, and then there's the lighter kind. And the lighter kind know they all got to kind of get together and work together so that one of the other ones doesn't win. And that's kind of where Ramirez comes in and all that kind of stuff. Because I think Ramirez, he kind of telegraphs in a lot of it what he's saying and what he's doing. Even though he's been around all this time, he knows he's not strong enough to take on the Kurgan.
Well, he wants to form an alliance with Connor.
And that's kind of the whole thing. It's like, together. You've got these group of guys that are like, we know we can't let one of these guys win no matter what.
What's interesting, though, there's actually a scene that, and I know the movie never allows this to happen, but where Connor actually says to Ramirez, well, if it just came down to the two of us, would you try and kill me for the prize? And you don't really get an answer to it, but again, that would be an interesting question to ponder.
I think that's actually sorry, I just want to say that I think that's actually the real important role of the Kurgan in the story. He is what allows everyone else to be friends, because that way they know that they can't go and kill each other. With no Kurgan, if it was like only good guys, they would quickly devolve into bad guys that would go around hunting each other before they themselves were hunted down. There would be no reason to wait for any gathering. They would just go and relentlessly hunt each other. But because of the Kurgan, because there's this one big evil guy that allows everyone else to be friends, because they know we have to stay alive so that we can fight this one guy so he doesn't win. And if we kill him early, well, then they're back to hunting season on each other. But what he does is that he puts everyone else in a state of truce, not peace, but truce, until he is dealt with, which allows the friendships to happen. And that's actually is really, really important, because that's, as you pointed out, that is the only link to humanity that they really have left, because they've all gone through this with multiple wives and everything like that. And if you think about it, like everyone has experienced that life goes by faster and faster and faster the older you get. And the reason for that is simply that for each 1 year that passes, you have one more year of accrued memories to look back upon. Like, for instance, when you're 5, when you're 5 and you go to 6, that's like 1/5 of your life. Whereas when you're 50 to 51, that's 1/50th of your life. It's not really that much that happened in that 1 year. So, and this way it continues. So to them, it would probably continue. that life just flies by faster and faster, and they get more and more despondent, Dr. Manhattan style. But those friendships, even if it's a century since the last time they saw one another, that's the last thing that keeps them connected to humanity.
Just to pick up on the point that you'd made earlier, Tom, about how the original draft of the script didn't have any of the redeeming aspects of it, and it was very much just a grim battle between Connor and the Kurgan, and that kind of didn't really have any heart to it. I think what you get then with the new version of the script, when you have the character of Brenda that Connor falls in love with in the present day, it's the fact that the Kurgan puts her in danger that spurs him into action to go rescue her and fight him. And so he's kind of redeemed by that. It's ultimately a story of redemption where he's found a reason to fight and kind of live again, and it's restored his zest for life, I suppose. And ultimately, when he wins the prize, he's able to become mortal again and live a normal life.
Also, with her, I always found it interesting that she's a student of the past. And for her, the past it'll never be alive because it's in the past. And yet not knowing at first that she's now met a man who's lived everything that she's been interested in her whole life. Yeah. And I've loved that. I love that because as somebody, like, I'm constantly amazed learning about what humanity has actually done over the last 5,000 years. And it's fascinating. And I always think to myself, if time travel were possible, I would probably go back and surreptitiously take a video camera with me and, like, tonight, Golgotha, it is the crucifixion of Jesus. Like, I would take a camera, I would love to.
Gomorrah tonight at 10.
Yeah, I would love to have roamed through the past with video equipment and bring it back to the present and just see what it was like. And I think that to have met somebody who lived through all that, and that's one of the things I really like about when you see the relationship begin to develop. Here, Connor literally lives in a place that he has the detritus of centuries of his own life, that he's collected in one place, and it's the physical representation of everything that she loves and wants to be a part of, without understanding that he is that person. Like, he's the physical embodiment of what she's wanted her whole life. And I love that.
Remember when he goes around to her apartment and he brings a bottle of brandy with him, and it was bottled in like 1785 or something. Yeah. And he's reminiscing about all the things that happened that year. And obviously she doesn't know it, but we as the audience do, that he was around to experience all of those things. So, like, again, that bottle of brandy that's been open for 200 years is a little relic of the past that he can just bring with him.
Right. Well, you know what Christopher Lambert did in that scene that was a real great acting moment, because Mulcahy asked him, because he, like, took that pause there, and he's like, after the shot, he's like, well, what are you doing there? And he's like, I'm breathing in the air from that time. I'm taking in all the memories. He's like, that's the first time I've been able to breathe in the air from that time period since that time. He's like, the air between that cork and that bottle is from 1786 or whatever it is, and I'm remembering that year. He's like, cool. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. and that music, which is funnily enough, because you guys mentioned Meatloaf earlier, the music underneath that spot is one of the few times it isn't like Queen related or Kamen related. It was actually written by Jim Steinman, believe it or not.
Right.
Which is odd. It was just an oddball piece that they picked for some reason, or that he did for the movie. I can't remember which, but yeah. But bringing it back though, I didn't get to ask you yet, Robert. What was your introduction to Highlander? And then we'll get back into the rest of the conversation here.
I was in my first year of college, and I was going to before I transferred to USC, I was going to a school called the Evergreen State College in Washington State that's known for the student uprising. It happened in 2017. But I was the manager and buyer of a Laserdisc retailer. So I was selling, I would drive in 70 miles every weekend to work. And every Friday and Saturday night after I got off work, I would go see the latest movie. And I saw Highlander probably that Friday night, opening night.
I figured you did, yeah.
Oh, yeah. It was definitely something. I was already a Russell Mulcahy fan from his music video stuff, but he'd made a movie called Razorback, which was in Australia, about literally a killer boar. And I had liked that movie. Again, it was very just drenched in MTV style, but I liked it. So, and Queen, who didn't like Queen? And I went and saw it, and it was one of those discoveries where it was fantasy films at the time. Anything that was fantasy tinged was not great in the 80s. I mean, maybe Excalibur was, but we had like Dragon Slayer was kind of boring, but we had a lot
Willow
of
back then.
yeah, it was, and a lot of these like fantasy was the realm of the low budget schlockmeisters, like Yor, the Hunter from the Future. Sometimes you might get something like the Sword and the Sorcerer with a flying
Beastmaster once in a while.
Yeah, Beastmaster. All of these things were because you could make a movie, you could get somebody who was fairly ripped, and you could go to the desert and
just put him in a loincloth.
Yeah,
I think Conan would have been the big ones.
Conan was the best. I mean, that was the pinnacle, and that was, to me, Conan and Excalibur were the gold standards of fantasy cinema, and you know, nothing reached the heights of Conan to me. And the filmmaking, the powerhouse filmmaking, Basil Polidoris' score, Schwarzenegger, obviously his physicality, all the actors that were in Conan, and the dedication. I mean, nobody could have made Conan other than John Milius at that time. So that, and to me, and Excalibur too, with its stylization. And I always thought of Highlander as kind of a hybrid. You had the stylization of Excalibur, but you also had the Kurgan seemed like somebody that might have you know been in Samaria. So, and he probably was. Who knows? He might have met Conan at some point.
Actually, it's actually interesting you mentioned that, because Drinker, you may not know this, but the whole idea with Conan is that he's a proto-Celt. He's imagined as a Scottish Highlander. That is why I always say that Henry Cavill, who is now in line in the remake, would be the perfect Conan the Barbarian, because he has just the right ethnicity. He's like the black Irish type. Black
Henry
hair,
Cavill
blue
seems
eyes.
to be in line for everything.
I know, right?
But that's what Conan is imagined as, and like that far north, this like Cimmeria or Chimeria, as I prefer to call it, because that's what Conan would have called it. That's something, an imaginary land that lies today under the ocean between Norway and Scotland, kind of like the Shetland Islands. Approximately there is where Chimeria is. So basically, it's like he's a proto-Highlander that went to explore the world just for shits and giggles.
Yeah, and it's to me that was what this movie really was. I mean, somebody in the chat brought up the movie Krull, and I was really excited for this fusion of fantasy and science fiction, but it was kind of ultimately sort of dull, even though they were great. You have the glaive, one of the great weapons in fantasy filmmaking, and you have there's this great stop motion crystal spider scene, and Derek Meddings doing the effects, but it just, all of this fantasy stuff was all done in kind of the wake of Star Wars, and it was all fairly inert. I don't know if it was because it was too earnest or why it didn't really work for me. But when I went and saw Highlander, I was, from that opening scene, I'm like, okay, this is kind of gonzo. You know, like you brought up, Andre, that it had a very Terminator feel. It does look the same film grain.
Yeah,
you know,
and
that's
also the film grain looked. But then it's the typical aesthetics with the cinematography.
Yeah, the late night blue lighting, and absolutely.
Well, you know the bit where the Kurgan's checked into a motel and you see him walking down the corridor. You actually get the same soundtrack beats that you got in the Terminator.
Yeah,
the first one where he's really low pitched, really bassy, and he's wearing similar clothes as well. Like he's got the big leather jacket on and the grey t-shirt or whatever underneath. It's just very Terminator-ish, that moment.
Absolutely, and I loved that, because in a way, I mean, I've always thought of these films as being very operatic, and there's not. I always talk about peak verisimilitude. No, the heightened, over the top Wagnerian aspects of these movies were what made them so much fun. And like I said, the sincerity behind, they weren't afraid to have the Kurgan wear a leather jacket and, like you said, Drinker, walk down a corridor to music. If you didn't get it, here we go. And I think that's what made those movies so much fun. And I feel that's something that filmmakers don't really know how to do that today, because we've gone too far with the Asylum making Sharknado movies and everything. There's a goofiness now that exists that I don't think allows that operatic nature to really exist. They push it too far into absurdity.
I think nowadays there's a real like self-conscious, like wink wink, isn't this all a bit funny and a bit silly kind of thing, where the audience is encouraged to laugh at what's going on and not take it seriously. Whereas, Highlander takes itself just seriously enough that you can totally get bought into it. And like you say, the word earnest is probably the best way to describe it.
100%.
They believe in what they're doing. Whereas, it's like everything now has to be cloaked in like 10 layers of postmodern irony, and it's just so blah. So boring.
Yeah, it's very melodramatic, but it like basks in. Anyway, you were saying, Andrew. Sorry.
Yeah, I would say before we move on with today and also what came later, I just want to bring up a couple of super chats. We're going to take a couple of minutes doing that. One we can have on screen is Cyan Cassandra, who sends 10 Swiss franc and saying, "Great roundtable, thank you." Thank you for the support.
What a great name, by the way, Cyan Cassandra.
Yeah. And Douglas A. Burton says Kroll has a phenomenal soundtrack.
It does.
Reminds me I have to rewatch that one. ActionCom says, why does the post-apocalypse setting keep popping up in this franchise? Was that an abandoned idea in the original movie?
No.
Well, just hold that thought, because we're going to go through a couple of more, and then we'll start discussing the sequels that never happened after we're done with some of the sequels. No, they literally never happened because they even contradict and overwrite each other.
Yeah, they do.
We have that going. That's what I can bring up on screen. So then going back to the classics, Darius Münchhausen and Gran Wasu 42 both sent popcorn super stickers. And that 70s rock fan says, "Hail Midnight's Edge. Highlander is super fun. Have a tenuous personal link to the movie, as the plans they are watching at the end were from my RAF squadron." Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Oh, wow.
That's awesome.
And that is a thing in the Highlands, by the way. Like, if you ever go on vacation there or whatever, you'll probably hear, like, every so often, like a big jet just go flying overhead, because they use the valleys there to train for, like, low-altitude flying.
Oh, wow.
And it just comes out of nowhere. It's great.
It must have been a bitch I know it was a bitch to shoot the fighting sequences, but, like, just to have to wait for the planes and shit, I bet, if they didn't have them.
Yeah.
They weren't running. Yeah.
I think Glencoe is, because that's where they filmed it. That's a bit quieter, because it's almost like a nature reserve type.
No, they were trying to kill each other during those scenes. I don't know if you've heard those famous stories. The shooting in they real quick. They didn't feed the crew the first day, so Sean Connery stepped in and took care of that business. But that just kind of set the whole thing off to a bad note.
Yeah.
So by like the midway through the shoot, like, all the Irish extras were drunk by lunchtime and damn near killing each other with the real weapons they were fighting with. And they kept going, "You guys, this is just a movie." And they had like an on-call doctor who had like a line of guys. They're like, "Fuck it, this is fun." They were all drunk. They didn't give a shit. Taking chunks out of each other.
Yeah.
They're like that one guy who's getting drowned in that scene. Like, he's really getting dunked and shit. Like, like a lot of the hits are real.
I can't think of a quicker way to piss off extras than not feeding them as well, because it's a really boring job being an extra anyway. Like, the sort of meal breaks is like one of the things you look forward to.
Well, and Robert, you brought that up before. Is craft services is even on independent production, is one of the things you really should worry about first and foremost.
Yeah, whenever I talk about movie making to anyone and I bring this up, they all laugh at me and think I'm kidding. But no, I mean, a producer has half a day to win the crew, and they win the crew at lunch. And the first day, and you have to make sure that your crew is well fed and they feel satisfied, because then they know that you as the producer care about them. And the way you show that is making sure they have great food and great craft service. Craft service is like the table of snacks that's available, coffee and fruit and things like that, that's available throughout the day. And then you have the meals, obviously. But if you don't do that, independent filmmakers, you will lose. So lesson be learned. Good food. Remember that.
Yeah. Let's get through the rest of these super chats here then.
Yeah, we just got 50 Swedish krona from Stubble McShave. Tusen tack. Schwarzenegger, Rutger Hauer, and Christopher Lambert all had different odd European accents that gave them otherworldly feelings that fit fantasy stories.
Well, that's part of the reason Lambert got the part, because when he says, you know, where are you from? He goes, lots of different places. That was the thing, was when he was speaking English, it just had one of those unique sounds they couldn't place. And that's what McKay he liked, was like, this guy's been around for like 500 years. He'd have a lot of different places he's been.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's what I touched on earlier, is that his accent's just kind of this weird mishmash of different accents. And, you know, it kind of makes sense that that's what he would have adopted. It's just where he has to do his Scottish parts that, you know, it falls apart a little bit. Rutger Hauer was always, you know, he was great at just hiding his accent and just speaking with an American one, like right from his early roles.
The Dutch are great at that. You take someone from the Netherlands and you pop them in Norway in a weekend and they speak Norwegian. And likewise, if you pop them a weekend in Sweden, Denmark, Germany, or France, like their language is like this perfect mix of all of the above. So they're so easy to adapt at everything.
Yeah, we're still struggling with English up here in Scotland.
Moving on with
did I say Irish extras earlier? I meant Scottish extras. My bad.
Yeah, let's not confuse the two.
That's not.
Yeah. And moving on with the classic super chats, I can no longer bring up on screen. Peter from Austria says for €5, there can be only 3: Midnight's Edge, RMB, and The Drinker. Indeed.
Yes.
And on a related note, HyperGyver2 also says for $5, hail all 3 of my favorites in one place: Midnight's Edge, RMB, and The Drinker. Speaking of 3s, I would love to hear your guys' take on the 3rd film entry. Oh, we'll get into that. We'll get into that. Movie number 3, or rather, movie number 2 redone.
Yeah. So the actual real sequel, if you want one.
Yeah. And says, hi, gents. And
hello.
Stephen Otten says, hail Andre, Tom, RMB, Drinker, Wrenches, and Midnighters. There can be only one. While Joel Rice says for €5, hail everyone. Why you can't remake the Highlander with one simple word: Queen.
That's what Robert says.
Yeah, impossible to replicate a soundtrack of that caliber. And Durao On says for €5, still laughing at Tom's, there can only be Juan.
That was on Midnight's Edge Espanol earlier, and I said, you know why there's not so many Mexican immortals? Because there can be only Juan.
And Sleepy Technology says for $15, thank you so much, can we get a shout out for Adrian Paul?
Yeah.
He was the franchise anchor for years. If the show hadn't kept Highlander in the public eye, further movies may not have been made. Interview
That's a good point.
That's not a bad idea.
I would love to.
We'll get back into him later on. Anthony Rinaldi says for $5, did anyone notice Michael Kamen reused some of the orchestral score in Band of Brothers? I wonder how hard it was to score along with Queen's music.
For one, like reusing scores, that's not abnormal, as Robert,
that happens all the time.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
James Horner's entire career.
But no, Kamen did work directly with Queen to make sure the songs would go in and out. The funny story about Queen, real quick, was they only wanted one song from Queen, but after they saw the movie, they loved it so much. Each one of them wanted to write a song for the movie. So all 4 of them wrote a song for a movie, and then they even threw in an extra one, I think, because there's 5 songs, I think, altogether, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So they each one wrote one individually, and then they threw them an extra one. But
see, after doing my review, like I couldn't get it, Princes of the Universe out of my head.
I know, right?
I had to go and listen to it several times just to like purge myself of it. Damn, it's a good song though.
Well, and also, Who Wants to Live Forever? Yeah. Which is the ballad of the film. I say that phrase like right now. I just said it. Just saying it aloud, I get goosebumps.
Right, and you hear the orchestra kick in.
I mean, that song is unbelievable, and it even had more resonance when they used it in Bohemian Rhapsody. Right, when they're about Freddie Mercury's life, and it's
so weird, that movie, because it kind of implies that song was like written like almost with his realization that he had AIDS, but it's like, no, they just did it for the soundtrack for Highlander.
He didn't even know that. Yeah,
exactly. And they played fast and loose there. But
Brian May's the one that wrote it, actually. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, it's such a great song, and again, the Princes of the Universe is such this giant, big, bombastic. You could use it anywhere. You could use it for a sports team.
It was like it was pre-written for the TV series before the TV series existed, because it sounds like a TV theme. You know what I mean? Like that, just the way it sounds. Like it has that catch, that hook right off the bat. Like you hear it, and I know that, just like any other TV theme you hear right away from those first few notes.
And it also, it harks back to Flash Gordon.
Yes,
the whole idea of savior of the universe, princes of the universe, all of that, and I feel like we were robbed of another great Queen sci-fi soundtrack that would be the completion of their trilogy that began with Flash Gordon. And I always thought that where would they have gone? Because to me, when I think of 80s science fiction at its height, I think of Queen.
Too bad Freddie didn't like Star Wars.
Queen and Evangelist, I think. They were the two big hitters.
Yeah, absolutely.
I said, too bad Freddie didn't like Star Wars. Who knows what they could have done for that. But
imagine Star Wars scored by Queen. The mind boggles.
But yes, anyway, we'll get back to probably some more Queen and stuff as we go along, but we got to get through these super chats real quick.
Yes, indeed. We got a couple
we're on some limited time, not that we want to rush, but we're on a limited schedule. Yeah.
Ross Irving says for £10, I don't think you can recreate Highlander. The film, the music. Will it just be the Kurgan again? I think Chad is probably the best guy for the job, but Henry Cavill? I'm sure
I can understand Henry Cavill. I really they're going for the Duncan thing, and then I guess that's probably the best place for me to tell you my introduction to Highlander. It was through a girl. I did not.
Right.
Yeah. I saw this. I saw like a few minutes of the series. I'm like, this looks dumb. I liked the song and the intro, but like after a few minutes, I couldn't get what was going on, and I'm like, it just looked like a soap opera to me. So I'm like, fuck this. Well, and of course, a girl I was dating who happened to be the mother of my son, believe it or not, got me into Highlander. She loved the series. I'm like, I thought it was stupid. She's like, oh, but you got to see the movies. I fell in love with that first movie the first time I watched it, and probably watched it 20 fucking times the first week I saw it. Like, I just fell in love with it. I was like, how did I not know this movie existed? And then, of course, I made the mistake of watching the sequels. Yeah. The third film is decent enough. I will say the third film gets knocked around too much. But
can I make an admission? I've not actually seen the third film because I saw the second one, and that just put me off any Highlander sequel for life. I think
the only thing about the third film I don't understand, and let me tell you, it's got some cheesy ass moments, and it was produced by Dimension at the time, so it's got a lot of those tropes in there.
Yeah.
It feels the most like the first film of all the sequels, though. Like, it really does. And Mario Van Peebles does a great job as the villain. It adds a few extra new elements to it. The only thing it does that kind of boggles my brain is it ignores the series when the series was at its height. And that's what made that movie happen. So, like, it's like, why are you ignoring the TV series, especially when Connor was in the first episode? But anyway, yeah, like, that's my only kind of complaint with the third film.
But I think ultimately, like so many iconic movies that apparently because they made money, they have to have sequels made. Highlander was a movie that didn't gross a whole lot of money upon initial release, but because of home video, it became a huge. This was back when a home video release could outstrip what a film grossed at the box office worldwide. And I think Highlander, between cable and video sales, everyone said, well, this is a very lucrative franchise. We have to continue it, even though it was Highlander is a self-contained film. It ends, and that's one of the great things about it is it's very satisfying at the end of that movie, seeing the two of them together in romantic bliss. They're going to be able to live a life and with RAF jets screaming overhead in the Scottish Highlands, and what's not to love about that? And I get it, but the shameless cash grab immediately. How do you possibly make this story work And that's why we get one of the most inexplicable movies I've ever seen, which is Highlander 2. What? I mean, everything about that movie, from the shield generator. I mean, someone was watching Return of the Jedi too much. Like, no, we have a shield generator. It keeps the ozone away or whatever. I'm like, who came up with these things?
You can totally tell, like, they must have just watched the news and been like, this ozone hole seems to be a real problem. We'll put this in the movie because it's topical.
Highlander 2 is a amalgamation of, like you said, Robert, the first movie was a hit on video and cable. The financier saying you have to have Sean Connery in it no matter what, and it cannot be a cameo. And they even paid him $3 million to be in it. And then the other part was you have to explain where the Immortals came from. Plus, they had to write themselves out of the ending of the second or the first film. So, what is their fucking solution? Make them from another planet.
Yeah, out of all the ideas you could come up with, they're space aliens from the planet Zeist.
I know, right?
You know, and it's weird because as well, like, they get captured by what the fuck's his name? Michael Ironside's character.
Yeah,
General.
I can't remember either, but
General fuckhead. Anyway, yeah. So their punishment for trying to stage this big rebellion on planet Zeist is they get exiled to planet Earth, where they're going to be immortals and they're going to live forever until they eventually fight and win the ultimate prize. I was like, how's that a punishment? You're rewarding them. You're letting them live forever.
Right.
That's a great thing compared to just murdering them straight up.
I mean,
it also means that Kurgan is one of them. When you think about it, he was one of their troops that got exiled to Earth along with the rest of them. So he was on their side.
Yeah. What I never understood is in the first film, I always assumed that there was something naturally occurring. The idea of being an immortal is something that it was like a cycle in Battlestar Galactica. This has happened before. It'll happen again. And when the prize is given, the universe would reset. And you could have done a sequel and introduced, I mean, like they tried to, a new pantheon of immortals and gone from there.
Well, they even kind of set it up at the end when Sean Connery says there are generations being born every day.
Exactly. And what would happen like in the modern day when it's a lot harder to hide your identity and it's a lot harder to hide the fact that you are immortal, especially now, like we didn't have Facebook when they made the sequels, but whether social media, if you're an immortal, how do you end up staying off social media? How do you hide yourself in this day and age? And that could have been really interesting. Like in the future, there's a new generation, and you could have reinvented the franchise year after year after year. But no, instead they subverted all of it and turned it into space aliens. Where is this planet? Why Earth? Like, there's no other planet you could go to.
I'm going to be honest, right? Zeist looks like a total dump. It's just a barren desert. It's like I'd much rather be on Earth, thank you.
Well, and the other problem
got trees here and oceans. It's great.
Is they decided to shoot in, what was it, Argentina? I think it was. Where did they shoot? I think.
Yeah, I think it was in Argentina.
Okay, because the whole point is their tax and their dollar was so low at the time that they could shoot for like pennies on the dollar. But then when they moved their production in, they were having all these sorts of problems where they didn't even know the cost. The inflation was so bad that by the time they finished the movie, it cost them like 3 times what they thought it was going. It was a huge
revolution was happening.
Yeah, it was a huge fiasco at the time, and then they were trying to emulate things like RoboCop with the newscasts. And I think they figured if they set it in the future, they would not be hamstrung by a bunch of stupid shit they just thought about it in the wrong way. The third film handles it better. It just kind of handles it like Connor's like, I thought I won the prize, but I didn't. It was like, okay, that makes more sense. You got a major quickening rush from the Kurgan, who's, one of the oldest immortals. You could probably figure, something happened that it didn't happen. You're sucking up all this power. Okay, just that's all you have to do is say Connor thought he won the prize, but he didn't. That's all they did in part 3. It's just like, just kind of talk it away. That's all they did is like, I thought I did.
It's a better solution, but it's still, for me, it doesn't get around the fact that the first movie just ended on a really definitive, complete note.
Yes.
He's won the prize. And the prize isn't anything spectacular. He's now mortal again, and he's got like this degree of influence over like the people of the world. And he can.
Well, that's why I always thought it was dumb.
Evil. And it's something that's nice and subtle. But it makes sense, and he can use that for good for the remainder of his life. Perfect. And, he's found a woman that he loves, and he's going to just live a happy life. And that's just a perfect, emotionally satisfying ending. So it's really difficult to pick up from that and try and get him going off on other adventures and stuff. So, I understand the financial reasons for doing sequels. And damn, like getting Sean Connery back was a hell of a accomplishment, because he just doesn't do sequels. Like, apart from the Bond movies, like this is the only franchise where he's ever appeared in more than one film. So yeah, it was impressive getting him back for it. He must have. I guess he didn't look at the script too closely.
I don't think he cared when he saw the check.
Yeah.
Well, again, a bastardization of the first film, and I think that's something that is hugely problematic for any franchise that they keep trying to develop, that they don't have the story. You don't have a passionate filmmaker, you don't have a story, so you wind up not having a film that makes any kind of sense, because there is no artistic integrity at all other than the desire to make more money. And that is never a reason to make a film, because it's never going to be good. You still want your film to be good. You need to have motion pictures born out of passionate people who have a passion to tell a story. And I think Highlander is one of the most, perhaps the best example of what happens when nobody cares. Or maybe they care, but they didn't have a plan. There's nobody on that production other than a shameless cash grab, and you wind up with something like that, and it never works. I mean, the very idea of creating a sequel like this is self-defeating.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I don't know why people...
I just think a shameless cash grab with no artistic integrity and no plan. What kind of franchise can we think of nowadays where they've done something like that?
No, you're right. You're 100% right, Robert. Like, Highlander 2 is the antithesis of the first film. The first film is the prime example of, this is a high concept that you can do with a low budget, and it's a great concept that you can really work with. And that's where, that's the one caveat to the whole, like, I'm not so sure that there isn't something that can be done with this franchise now, but you are right, Critical Drinker. In this day and age, we have a problem. The only thing I'm looking forward to is we may have the right talent behind it, and it's possible to build a franchise off it now that you know what you have. Like, that was what they didn't know with the first film. They just, like, it was just a movie at that time. There wasn't franchises like there are now. It was just, you make a movie and it may make a franchise, it may not. Back then, as we pointed out many times, as Robert, you've been a part of the proceedings when we've talked about it, they were kind of embarrassed by sequels back then. It was not a normal thing. Like, even the Friday the 13th, the police academies, they were a joke. Like, they would get to a point where they would stop putting the number, or the reason why they would use Roman numerals is so, normal folk wouldn't know which one they were on, because they didn't care. It didn't matter. They just wanted them to think, you're seeing another one of this franchise. You don't think about the fact that it's the 9th one. Just,
No, I think that to me, like, it might have been interesting, or it might be interesting, if you did a trilogy of Highlander movies, the first one being set in the distant past, and you deal with, like, the rise of the Immortals from, say, pre-Egyptian times all the way up through, I don't know, World War I. And then the middle film of that trilogy would see the modern age, essentially. How do the Immortals, as they're building toward the prize, battle through the 20th and 21st centuries? And then the third film would take place in the distant future, where the gathering happens. Something along those lines, because otherwise, when I think about remaking this film, I see no way that, I don't even know of a filmmaker that could do what the original did in terms of combining that operatic, bombastic, MTV style. I just think it would wind up being much more conventional.
You're not wrong.
How do you do it? Like,
I think you got to kind of go more with the series, and I think that's why they're going with Cavill, because he reminds me more of Duncan.
Right, but they've already done the series.
No, I get you. But that's the thing, is the series would set you up in a way that you can expand on the story and have more characters than just Immortals, and build on this world and the idea that it's much, much bigger than the movies presented as. You know what I mean? Like, the movies, it feels like you're kind of in this tunnel vision. And yeah, there's characters that pop up in the third film from the show, I guess. I can't remember exactly where, but, like, they don't even mention any of the other parts of it, because they still run the third film like he's winning the prize at the end. Like, that's the thing. It's like, yeah.
I mean, I think that's what I appreciated so much about the first film is that there's a real elegance in the simplicity of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they don't go into much detail about where did the immortals come from, like how did they become immortal,
right?
How is it decided who becomes one, and you know, all these questions that come up from it. They don't need to answer it because it's not important to the plot. What's important is what they now do in order to win the prize and how it affects Connor and, you know, how the Kurgan's going to challenge him and how he's going to respond to that threat. That's the important thread of it. You know, the whole concept of the Immortals is just to set up this conflict. But I was fine with that because it stirs your imagination. You can conjure up all kinds of possibilities about where they might have come from or what the meaning behind it all is. I just don't necessarily need the film to answer those kinds of questions. That's what I appreciated about the first one. I think that you can absolutely build on it, and you could, like you say, Tom, you could blossom it out into this enormous expanded universe with, you know, different factions of immortals and a whole culture that emerges amongst them and like hierarchies and all that stuff. I'm just not necessarily sure I want that.
No, I get you, but my point is like it feels like me like it's a franchise that was never handled properly. It could have been much more than it was, and it was like almost as it became a hit despite itself at one point. Like it was almost like they were actively trying to destroy the franchise at every damn turn. Like you had this popular series, so what do? They make a third film that has nothing to do with it. Then the series finishes up and they plan on making a fourth film that combines the movies and the series, and they went and fucked that up too. And then the last series is garbage and the last movie is garbage, and then they make an animated series that's more like the second film, and everybody's like, what the fuck? So you have this like vision that's all over the goddamn place. And I feel like if you had somebody who could, like a Kevin Feige or what have you, that could really usher this franchise, it could be exactly what you just said, Drinker. You could have your main, you know, Henry Cavill films, and then you have a series that expands on that and builds off that may not have Henry Cavill in it. But, you know, that's the thing is this universe is ripe for the picking. There's so much here. Like I've also brought up other franchises that never got to live up to being a franchise. Even was like The Last Starfighter, another one Andre hasn't seen. You know, that's a universe that definitely could have been, you know, utilized but never was. But again, I do hold that original film in a very special place. So I do understand where you're coming from too on that part. Like I know they'll never be able to capture that same thing again. But anyhow,
well, I mean, the question is, I again, I feel like we're now living in a world where everyone is so averse to doing something new and unique,
right?
That we're just doomed to keep getting these. It's very funny. I think I look at the two Verhoeven remakes. I look at Total Recall and I look at the RoboCop remake.
Oh my God, how tragic were they? Well, Robert, before you continue, I just have to say that I have another engagement, so I have to be off. But I have nothing more to add here because I've only seen the original Highlander, and I agree with the Drinker. There can only be one, and I'm quite happy with that. But I am look forward to seeing what you all are going to discuss later on. So you feel free to carry on with that. Tom, you have all the super chats, so we're going to go through with that.
I'll do the best I can, and any we do miss in the process, like you said, we'll get in the morning. Yeah,
anyone we miss, we'll do in the morning show tomorrow. So just keep on watching because the Drinker will be here for a while longer. Burnett is here, but I have to be off. So with that. Drinker, Burnett, thanks for being here. It's always a pleasure to discuss some great movies with you.
Cool, man.
Well,
all right, to see you again.
What I was going to say about remaking films, I mean, I look at movies like, for instance, the trifecta for me of great remakes is Philip Kaufman's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, John Carpenter's The Thing, and Cronenberg's The Fly. And they all took the original concepts of the original films and twisted them, and Carpenter went back to the original John W. Campbell story, Who Goes There, and really extrapolated on that and gave us one of the great classics of sci-fi horror cinema. And then Cronenberg made The Fly uniquely Cronenbergian. And I think what I would like to see is that if somebody is going to remake, obviously Henry Cavill, I think is great casting, but I would love to see a filmmaker come in and sort of reinvent the concept in a different way. Now, I don't know what that way is, but I think that if you're going to remake Highlander, you should do that. You should give it some kind of a different kind of a spin, so it becomes uniquely that filmmaker's take on the central idea, as opposed to just try and remake the movie itself.
That's kind of what I'm leaning towards. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's interesting the examples that you gave, because they're absolutely, you're right. Like, they are far superior remakes of the originals. I think the difference there, though, is that those originals all came from like the 1950s. They were very much like old black and white monster movies, which were much more constrained by like filmmaking techniques of the time and all that stuff. Like, whereas now the sort of jump between movies like Highlander, which were made back in the 80s, and now like filmmaking techniques aren't as different. They haven't improved as vastly. I mean, yeah,
that's
CGI
true.
Has, but like the actual, acting style, the presentation, all that sort of thing hasn't improved to that degree. And so I think it's more of a challenge to make that far superior remake.
I completely agree with you.
Right. No, and that's what I'm saying too. And I'm like that's kind of getting where I was getting to, though, too, originally, Robert, was like, if you have somebody, which we do have, one of the directors of John Wick taking this on. Now it depends on what kind of script they get out of it. But if they go a completely new kind of just revision this in a way that it's not trying to outdo the original. It's just trying to do its own thing. And that's what I was getting at, Robert. Like, the potential is there, but you're also right, Drinker, that in this day and age, it's hard to expect anything like a Thing remake or a Fly remake or even Scarface like we got back in the 80s, to where those were like completely different visions on the original concept. But I want to grab a couple of these super chats here real quick. Jesse Miller, our good buddy, says, isn't the villain from Highlander 2 the same villain from Beastmaster 3? I was Ironside in 3 or was it 2, I think? I can't remember which Beastmaster. I think he was one of the Beastmasters. But I think you're right.
I've always entertaining anyway.
Is it the first one?
Ironside.
Okay, it's the first one. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I knew he was in one of them. Full Metal Smile, thank you so much for the super sticker. We appreciate that here. He sent us another one as well, or she sent us another one. Thank you. Uber B-Man says, the TV show that shown that the immortals could see others like them before they become immortal. If they were not to die, they would age naturally and die old. Yeah, they kind of actually set that up in the first film, because the Kurgan is specifically looking for Connor for that reason. He knows he's the one. Yeah.
Because I think the TV show plays with that as well. Like,
quite a bit.
If you happen to have died at a very young age, you'll be stuck as a child for like forever.
I think they even had there's the immortal child, and then there was the whole thing with Tessa, where like she's an immortal too or something like that, or one of the girlfriends is. I can't remember now. It's been a while since I watched the whole series. But
you kind of want to hope that you died like in your prime, like your first death, so you became immortal like when you're still physically capable.
Well, they kind of set up that you can work out your muscles and get strong that way and stuff like that, but you basically can't like destroy yourself in so many ways. Like, they kind of set that up. Stubble McShave says, it's futile to remake a cult movie they can't win. Yeah, that's kind of where culture has kind of made this movie untouchable. Like Ghostbusters, like Back to the Future. Like, I do get where Critical Drinker's coming from. I totally understand that this is an untouchable film. Even Robert's brought up, what do you do about the music? I said, well, you just use the original film music. You can't remake Queen, so you just use that. I mean, at least the original theme anyway, that at least a couple of them. But again, I'm curious to see what they do with it, but I'm not expecting a great film out of it. But if something fun would be nice. Paulus Plain says, Iron Maiden should make the Highlander soundtrack of the new film. P.S. Love from a half a Norwegian, quarter English, quarter Scot. Love from Norway. Take. Yes, and I'm sure Andre would appreciate the Norway love there, and I'm sure Drinker's loving the Scottish love, and of course,
I love a quarter of you.
Anyway. Chris Webb says, this is why sequels suck. The mystery is what makes the movies great. You're not wrong, but I think if you plan it right, a trilogy would work. I think. And I may have missed a few super chats in between there. If I did, somebody please let me know. But because it jumped on me. And then Ross Irving is the next one I have. So if I missed any in between there, please, if any of the mods catch that, let me know. Like the Kurgan said in the church, it's better to burn out than to fade away. This can be linked to reboots. that's a good point to be made there, and that's kind of where critical drinkers saying like just leave it alone. I'm not against that either. But as we know, if there's a franchise to be mined, they will mine it, and I just want it to be fun and good. That's all I want.
Well, I just woke. You know that, right?
Unfortunately,
yeah.
Yes.
I just wonder, like, when they remade, like, I really enjoyed Blade Runner 2049, but to me, Blade Runner was never a hit movie. It didn't make money, and it has this cult following in Hollywood. It's revered, and most people who like science fiction films love Blade Runner, as do I. But I don't know why anyone thought sinking almost $200 million into a Blade Runner sequel was necessarily a good idea. And I wonder if remaking Highlander is something that's actually viable, because the film is 35 years old. And even if you watch the series growing up, the series too, it's not like this is the spring chicken of a franchise. This is an aging franchise that's way over a quarter of a century old. And I wonder now, can you make a Highlander remake that audiences will embrace, especially when you have Henry Cavill starring in The Witcher? How do you remake? I mean, again, when Highlander came out originally, the films that we were getting, like somebody brought up Krull and Ridley Scott's Legend, and fantasy was not combining. This was a rock and roll fantasy that made it appealing for the time, for the MTV audience, and it added fantasy elements that were hardcore. I mean, dudes swinging swords and chopping each other's heads off to a Queen soundtrack. This was something that was, I think, at the core of what made Highlander effective. And I'm wondering, are we beyond that now? I mean, after seeing the video games that we have, whether it's Ghosts of Tsushima or or Witcher or any of these other fantasy, after Game of Thrones, which direction do you take this in to make it work today? And I don't know what the answer to that is.
You know what? I very much agree with you on this one, because there was something about that gritty 1980s New York setting that was just so effective in this movie. When you contrast it with the Scottish Highlands in the 15th century or whatever, and like it's very pristine and beautiful, and then you get this grungy New York set, and it's just a great contrast. Whereas if you do it now, God, you know, the time we live in now, it's everything's so high tech, and like you say, you've got all the problems with like surveillance, social media, everything like that. A person can't just kind of live in the shadows like Connor did in the Highlander movie originally. And so there's just so many issues you'd have to overcome, and like I don't see it being such an interesting point of comparison. Like, the world we live in now is very sort of clean and sanitized, and you know, everything's about safety and making everyone feel lovely about themselves and stuff. And it doesn't match up as well with the kind of vibe of the Highlander. You know,
yeah, I that's kind of the way I feel about a lot of these things. I mean, we live in an era that is so sanitized now. I mean, we don't have lust anymore. There's no lust or zest for life. You can't. And the toxic. I mean, what is Highlander if not a toxic male fantasy? Where why should these immortals try and kill each other? I mean, this isn't right. Why are we? No, can't you? And I think we've missed something. And when you're contrasting the modern age with the medieval world, where you know, people would storm into a village, kill all the men, rape all the women, take them home, whatever. I mean, this doesn't happen. I mean, now it's like, oh, you people back in the day, you were very not nice. Mm. And I don't see how this whole idea can even be brought in to the present day. And like you were saying, Drinker, woke. I mean, even beyond that, why do you have to behead each other? Can't we sit down and really talk about this? Isn't there? And I think that we're missing that. Like Conan the Barbarian. Can you imagine if Conan, the 82 Conan, was made today? And exactly the same. Yeah. If the exact same movie had never been released in 1982, but but Conan the Barbarian was made today and came out. Can you imagine what would be said about that film?
It would be glorious, and that's why I'm hoping that's what happens with this. But I know you guys are probably right. So,
well, think about the scene where the Kurgan kills Ramirez and then he rapes Heather, and that's a horrific thing to happen to her. But then the movie doesn't dwell too much on that. It just kind of moves on to like the rest of their life together. Again, that's just a thing you couldn't show now. It would have to be.
Well, it doesn't even show it actually.
Yeah, that's what I mean though. But like the fact that it happened, that would become like the centerpiece of the entire movie, and it would be like her trying to get over the trauma of what happened to her, and it's like, no, she's just a tertiary character there to demonstrate the price of being immortal. But like, again, it's just a thing you wouldn't be allowed to just gloss over now and move on from. It would have to be like this huge thing that had to be dealt with. And it would get so caught up in the politics of movie making today that I just don't know how you could do anything like that.
No, I mean, look at that Game of Thrones episode where Ramsay Bolton, the wedding night of Sansa Stark, and how many op-ed pieces were written about that. This girl, she was raped on her wedding night. And, well, yeah, I mean, that was the time. That's
what happened back then.
I mean, it's like, this is not a nice environment. Do you not understand? Have you not read about the history of how humans used to treat each other? And I feel that that's something that even the time that Highlander is set is politically incorrect now. We can't even talk about or be honest about real human history without people going bananas.
Well, can you imagine what the ethnic makeup of Scottish Highlanders would be if it was made today?
There's not enough black Scottish people.
It would be the most diverse Highland clan.
Well, they're not from Zeist, so I don't know what to tell you, lady. William Silva says Highlander 2 would have made more sense, speaking of Zeist, if Zeist was some mysterious higher dimension and the immortals are part of prisoner running man forced to fight.
Isn't that like the Renegade cut, basically?
Kind of, sort of.
Yeah.
But they're just time travelers instead. So it's kind of similar. You're right. It just trade dimension for the distant past. Insane Insane says, I was researching my family history and finding out the castle from the Highlander movie was a part of it. Simply awesome for this Texan. Well, that's cool. Yeah, that castle actually exists. It's a real castle.
Ewan Donnan Castle. Yeah, I've driven past it many a time.
That's cool.
It's used in so many movies. It's just like generic Scottish castle #1 for like Hollywood movies.
Well, speaking of like back then, they actually had to take down all the electrical poles and electric lines and all that shit, I guess. And nowadays, you could probably just get rid of a lot of that modern stuff with the.
Yeah, it'd be done in post, I would think.
Yeah. Gay Bay says, "Who on this panel wants to live forever?"
Me.
Who doesn't?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not that attached to people anyway, so I could get fine with being
really good at video games if I lived forever.
Yeah, I could finally learn to juggle. Can't do it. It's never stopped hurting.
No shit, right? And hopefully I didn't miss any more super chats because the damn thing jumped on me again. Master Clockwork says, curious if you saw the movie Man from Earth, an interesting film delving into the idea of a mortal man trying to live a normal life. I don't think I've seen that one.
I own it.
Yeah. I was gonna say you probably would know.
It's good. It's written by Jerome Bixby. It's good. And it's a low budget science fiction film, but it's quite well done. I don't know, 10 years ago.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted a rough idea. Okay,
and it was one of those things. I had never heard of it until it came out on home video. I don't know if it ever played anywhere, and I just picked it up because Jerome Bixby wrote a couple of great episodes of TV that I like, including the Star Trek episode Mirror Mirror, the very first Mirror Universe episode.
Right,
but good stuff.
Master Clock. Okay, we got that one. Huron Steadfast says, "Go 2,000 years in the past when Rome came to England shores. Have a Roman as an immortal. Make it dark and violent." Yeah, kind of. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can do with it. That's what I was trying to say. Is I mean, you can even kind of still set it in the same universe, but it's just been so. It's so convoluted now. You're almost better off just starting from fresh. Adam Mulford says you could sit in the third world country where technology isn't on the same level as the first world. Have them hiding in places in the dark corners fighting.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what you would have to go with.
Yeah.
Just have them be in South America or somewhere, and
out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, pretty much just living off the grid, I suppose. You couldn't have him in a swanky New York apartment, but man, that aesthetic of living in the city just looks cool.
It does, and what if you did I think that what if there was like a detente between all the immortals? They just resolved themselves and they didn't know, and a Kurgan-like character suddenly came, they didn't know about this character. And this guy just starts, or woman starts cutting a swath through the immortal population of the modern day, and they have to like do something about it. Like, what are we going to do now? And put a spin on and make it like the immortals represent Rome at its height, and this new character is like a Visigoth coming over the hill, and this status quo of this, maybe they're old and complacent and they like being immortals, and they've decided not to kill one another, and then somebody just gleefully shows up and starts dispatching them, and they don't understand, well, why are you doing this? And it could be something that maybe these are people that just want to, like the Joker, want to watch the world burn. Some great nihilist who's come in and like, yeah, I'm going to kill all of you MFs, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things you could do. You could have immortals forming like some Illuminati type organization that's been existing throughout human history, trying to direct things and influence the course of world events, and they secretly pull the strings. There's all sorts of things you could do with that.
They kind of add elements like that in the series and Endgame and stuff like that. But yeah, they even have like this group of immortals who basically they basically are in like a monastery. So like the nothing will ever end. Like, so it's almost like, it's very kind of convoluted. Like I said, there's a lot you can kind of get into, but I do like the simplicity of the original film too. But I know, Drinker, we don't have much time with you, but Ross Irving is sending a very generous 50-pound super chat here. Says, Connor is so depressed in Highlander. Take the basketball scene. Nothing brings him joy. He is only forced by Kurgan to save everything. Even Christopher Lambert said it's a huge weight for a character. He doesn't relate to people at all. Yeah, that's kind of what we all were saying earlier about like where he's at in his life. And, if you had been living that long and lost so many people and all that kind of stuff, definitely.
Well, I think as well, like, because when he's watching the wrestlers, he's getting flashbacks to like real fights going on, like when he was a Highlander. Contrasting that with the fake showmanship of the wrestling ring and, people actually hacking chunks out of each other and stuff. It's almost like he's sitting there thinking, God damn, like everything's just so fake and watered down these days. Like it's nothing like when I was young.
Yeah, it's even contrasted with the guy going, "You're gonna love this," and he's just like all animated and kind of sitting there chilling.
Yeah.
What's funny about that scene? Do you guys realize all those shots were done in 10 minutes? They only had 10 minutes to shoot it.
Really?
So, yeah, because it's shot during a real wrestling match. They tried to do it during a hockey game, but the whatever, I can't remember the name of the place that did the hockey games there wouldn't let them film. So they let them set up their rig real quick at a wrestling match. Damn. And they literally only gave them 10 minutes to shoot all that. So all the close-ups are shot on a stage. But all the flying bits and stuff, that was all done in 10 minutes.
Cool.
Yeah. Douglas A. Burton sends another one in. Sorry about that. I almost screwed up your name. The Highlander remake will probably feature a female co-lead who will stop the quickening by defeating the Immortals. She breaks the cycle of toxic masculinity, and the Immortals agree to tackle climate change.
Yeah, we're laughing, right? We shouldn't be laughing because this is exactly what
well, considering what we got before, that's where they'll get into that. And I'm going to grab some more of these newer ones, and then I'll get. We only got like 3 more minutes with you, Critical Drinker. Did you have any final thoughts on Highlander before you had to take off? Let's do that instead, real quick.
Final thoughts. Yeah, just really enjoyed it. It's a classic cult movie that's got real charm and heart behind it. And I just don't think it's the kind of thing you can replicate in today's world.
I agree.
I hope for the best, but I can't say I won't be saying you told me so in about 2 years probably. So with that, I'm going to grab this one real quick. Mr. Tickle Trunk says, I strongly disagree with Robert Meyer Burnett and Drinker. The Joker has a mix of modern 70s and made over $1 billion. The human brain hasn't changed at all. Ignore the manufactured media outrage. Make it. Well, that's what I'm kind of saying, Mr. Tickle Trunk, is I hope that the people behind it because they got one of the directors of John Wick, and John Wick wasn't all that woke. So I'm hoping that that's what they just concentrate on, the shit that made this franchise initially big, and that was the swords and the boobs and
what more does a man need in life? Honestly, man, I'd like nothing better than to be proved wrong on this one. And if it turns out to be a kick-ass movie, then great, I'll be happy.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, hope springs eternal, and these kinds of movies are so difficult to make and make well. I want every movie I see to be great. It gives me great pains when I see a film that doesn't live up to expectations or something that I feel like, oh, it just didn't work.
Right. Well, that's the drum that we keep beating constantly, Robert, is we want to like these things. It's not like we go into them going, oh, I hope I hate Fast and the Furious 9.
No, I think we go into all of these movies wanting them to be great. That's why we love this stuff. I mean, our baseline is that we all love this material. And when we see something that we don't love, it's like Chris Gore, who you had on the show the other day, brought up in his interview. He said the studios should be great at this, like studio filmmaking. And when people are doing these remakes, they've been doing it for so long that there's no excuse why they can't deliver A+ entertainment every single time. I mean, that's their one job, is to provide great entertainment. And the fact that they don't, I love when Chris Gore called it malpractice. And when you see the idea of making bad movies is malpractice, I love that. I'd never heard that before, but I agree. And unless you have a lock, they should already know what this, and maybe they do, what this remake is going to be. It should be completely rock solid and ready to go. And that's why they're going to make it.
They've been working on it for a decade. They should.
Well, I would hope so. So maybe it's going to turn out to be great. I hope so. Hope springs eternal.
Yeah, if you check out our latest video, we did a timeline of how long this remake has been in the making. It's been over 10 years now. Sorry, Critical Drinker.
Oh wow, yeah. I need to check that out. Like, so I'm kind of interested in how these production things go. But yeah, I'll probably have to drop off there because I got to prep for my next stream. I'm going to be live streaming on my channel with Mauler, and we're going to be talking about Shaun of the Dead.
Shaun of the Dead. I just got
a great film.
I got the 4K trilogy set of that. I got to watch that in 4K yet, man.
Oh man,
I've seen it, of course. I love it, but
yeah, that Cornetto trilogy of movies is just fantastic. Like, from an actual writing point of view, it's just an absolute joy just to see really well constructed scripts.
Right.
Also, Shaun of the Dead works as both a parody and a send up, and as a great horror film in its own right.
Absolutely.
Which is a very hard thing to do.
Yeah. So I'm very much looking forward to talking about that. So I'll be doing that in about 40 minutes.
Yeah, because Shaun of the Dead starts out like a sitcom, and then it moves into like a parody, and then it's a tragedy by the end in a way.
It's got everything, and it's got a romance as well, and moments of real drama and pathos. So
yes,
yeah, a very interesting film.
Well, it was great to stream with you again, sir.
Yeah, hopefully we'll wrap this up sooner than later, and then we can hop over there and check that out. And I can't wait to hear what you guys say about it, because I love that movie too. So thanks for being here, Drinker. It's been a pleasure getting to talk this movie with you, and hopefully we'll talk some more in the future, maybe after the new film comes out, or who knows. Maybe we'll get Andre to watch part 2.
Oh, that'll be a joy. But no, it's been a pleasure talking about Highlander with you guys. It's always a pleasure to stream with you. So I'm sure we'll catch up again in the near future.
Absolutely.
Yes,
Thank you so much, man. And hopefully, Robert, you got a few more minutes. We can bust through some of these super chats here.
Please.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right, we got Eddie Max of Andor. I like that. Nothing original anymore from big studios. That's basically what Robert was kind of just saying, like what Chris was saying. And it's true. There's no good excuse. Adapt the Stormlight archives by Sanderson into movies. Original fantasy you can get behind. Trust me. That's something you're always saying too, is, there's stuff that just hasn't even been touched yet. Even within franchises, it bugs the piss out of you that there's stuff that just like is left there to collect dust and,
Well, it's I think, it's untried, and I don't understand why. There's very few filmmakers that a studio or a streaming service will trust outright. You really have to have a track record. Movies and TV are so expensive. To invest in someone's vision, they have to have proven themselves, and really on the planet Earth right now, there's probably only 30 or 40 people that can command that, if that. that can command that kind of respect, where people will greenlight something based on, like, if you walk in as a filmmaker and you're like David Fincher and you say, I really want to adapt this Sanderson fantasy series, people would say, yeah, but David, you've never really done fantasy. I mean, Benjamin Button's kind of fantasy, but it's not my favorite movie you did. I mean, are you really qualified to do it? And that's what people would say. And you're like, man, the guy's a world-class filmmaker. He should be allowed to do whatever he wants to do. But that's not the way the world works. And now everybody wants to remake something that's already been made. And when you see the tragedy of, like, it's not that like they get a great director from South America to come up to direct the RoboCop remake. And he made 2 Elite Squad movies that are essential viewing if you love action, cop, thriller. It's amazing. And it's like, yep, we're going to remake RoboCop and we're going to bring this exciting foreign director to America. Because, hey, Paul Verhoeven was a Dutchman, but Paul Verhoeven, like, found this property and he made, it's his sensibility that made RoboCop what it is. You can't just remake it, because the spirit, it's kind of the spirit of anarchy that flows through RoboCop is what makes that movie so good. Same with Total Recall. And to remake them without that sense, that very personal perspective that Verhoeven brings to it, I mean, it's not just the story. You have to have the spirit of what it is you're remaking. And unless you have the person that can bring you that, it doesn't work. And I feel that Highlander was such a product of its time, and we've seen what happens. We have multiple examples. The TV series worked, but we have multiple cinematic examples of why this concept is so difficult to do. So the idea of someone's like, well, it's been long enough, let's just go remake it. Well, prove to me you have a great idea that somebody really knows. And the fact that they'll hire a director, if you're going to remake Highlander, the director should be the person that decides, here's my take and here's how I want to remake Highlander. Don't just hire somebody because, oh, we like the John Wick franchise, so here, you should come do our Highlander remake. Well, why? You know, unless the filmmaker has a passionate take, why do it?
No, I
just
don't
because
disagree with you there. Yeah, I hope he does have a passion for it.
I do too. But if he does, then he should certainly have. He should have been involved in the development process and the storylines coming out of them. I mean, I always feel that auteurist filmmakers, like a John Carpenter who writes and directs, or like a David Cronenberg, that's why we got those great remakes in The Thing and The Fly. Or James Cameron, you know, who comes in and says, I have an idea to make a sequel to Alien. And coming off of the cloud he had doing Terminator, which was a successful, low-budget, you know, essentially indie movie, when he comes in and he's passionate about it, he goes to Fox and he's like, here's my idea. And when you have a great filmmaker, Aliens originated with him. And when you look at it, I mean, everything that James Cameron loves is in Aliens. And just like Terminator, it's a very fully realized vision. And I think that somebody needs to come in with a take on a Highlander. It can't just be something that, well, what IP can we exploit? And that's the problem with our modern day, is that from a corporate perspective, they've got these IPs that they want to exploit, and yet you still have to make a great film from them. You can't, whereas at the corporate level, how do you quantify a great film on a spreadsheet? How do you do that? Well, from a corporate standpoint, you can't. You just assume that your IP, whether it's Star Wars, whether it's Highlander, people love Highlander, so you make a Highlander movie, people will show up. But what isn't quantifiable is that, no, people show up for great entertainment because it's great entertainment. But how do you can't put that on a spreadsheet. You just assume that, yes, we've bought this IP and we're going to go make this. And I look, Warner Brothers, I think, felt that way about Blade Runner 2049, a sequel that I think is an amazing film, but it cost $170 million. Where did they get the idea that a Blade Runner sequel was going to generate any money at that price level? Blade Runner was it was always a cult film. Yet they've
been better off remaking it, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, and then from a monetary standpoint, that film was beautifully made. Denis Villeneuve clearly put all of his passion into it. But the problem is that franchise, quote unquote franchise, was never a valuable franchise. It's just something that people think about in Hollywood circles or in genre fan circles, but the general public's like, what's Blade Runner? You know, they didn't even bother to re-educate people about what the movie was. It didn't do well.
Like a big re-release or something. But something. Yeah, you're right.
And then I think that happens all too often, especially because science fiction, fantasy, and horror can generate the big bucks if they hit hard. And that's what I think the problem with living today is, in all this risk-averse exploit former IPs. Well, that only works on on that corporate level. You still have to make great entertainment. And I think to do that, you need passionate filmmakers who come in and go, I want to make an Alien sequel. I loved Alien, and you have to have a world-class filmmaker that has the idea, and that's where these things should come from. But it goes the other direction. Now corporations are deciding we need to exploit this IP, and then they look for people. Well, let's hire them, or let's hire them. You've already lost the game because you're not making this story based on passion of someone making something new. It's always work for hire, and if it's work for hire, you're never going to get what you really need, which is that incredible passion from some cracked filmmaker who's going to make it their life's ambition to make this franchise property the greatest thing ever.
No, I agree on that point. I mean, even if it's not somebody who's necessarily passionate about the franchise, somebody who's passionate about their take on a specific idea can also, because, like, we always bring up the key example is Nicholas Meyer. Wasn't a Star Trek fan, but he got it and he understood it. And that's all I care about too, is like, I don't care if, like, I even brought up the fact that I didn't give a shit if Kevin Smith was a He-Man fan. He didn't have to lie to us about it, though. Like, that's the thing. It's like, all he had to do is come in and say, look, I'm a Star Wars fan and I like Conan. I think I can add something to the Masters of the Universe. Instead he's like, oh, I love He-Man. I've always loved He-Man, blah, 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 blah. And then you go back to, there's a quote I found from the Comic Book Men show where he flat out says, I've never been a fan of He-Man, which makes sense because he would have been like 12, 13 years old when He-Man came out.
Right.
Like, he would never, like, he's roughly the same age as you, as far as I know. So like you too, like, I'm sure you know of He-Man, but I doubt you were as into it as somebody who's my age, where it was directed at my age at that time.
It's funny that you bring this up because tomorrow is June 4th, and it is the anniversary, the birthday of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan's release. On that day, on June 4th, 1982, I was going to get in line to see Star Trek II at the John Dance Theater. And I went to a toy store, and that I bought the first release of the He-Man figures.
Oh, cool.
He-Man, Man-at-Arms, Skeletor, Teela. Was it Teela? It was not she. Was it she?
Teela.
Teela. Let's see, Matt, and the flying. Who was the flying guy? That first
Stratos.
Stratos, and those first figures, because I'd never seen figures that looked like those figures, and they were sci-fi and fantasy mixed together. Like Man-at-Arms was clear, and Beast Man. I loved the original characters, and I bought them all, and I had a bag, a big bag of them, and I put them under my seat when I saw Star Trek 2. I saw it 4 times.
Oh, that's cool.
And I bought those figures, and this was pre-animated series. And so I loved the He-Man figures. I never, ever watched an episode of the animated series, but I had those figures on my shelf in my bedroom for a really long time because I liked the hybrid nature of them. I liked the way they were basically
they look like
square.
a Frazetta Peyton come to life.
I love those. And I love, like, Man-at-Arms with his blue helmet with the circuitry in it and his kind of futuristic armor. I loved those. And that was my experience with He-Man. And then I learned about it because I still babysat kids in the neighborhood. And, like, there were these kids, the Falquists, that I would babysit. And they had, like, every He-Man figure. They had Castle Grayskull. They had Battle Cat. They had the Wind Rider, the flying. They had everything. And I would go babysit them. And we would spend the entire time. I would always be Skeletor, and they would defend against me. And that's how I learned about He-Man. I'm like, I like He-Man. But I would never presume to say that I watched the show or I didn't have an attachment to it. And I think nowadays we have a lot of filmmakers like J.J. Abrams. I mean, my God, he's making Star Trek movies and he's going, I never liked Star Trek.
Right.
Why hire you? Why hire you to direct a Star Trek movie? It wasn't like Nicholas Meyer is a very classically educated man. He comes from a family of musicians, and he's a very highly educated guy, and he understands because he's very literary. He was a novelist and a filmmaker. He made Time After Time before he made Star Trek 2. So he's a very smart, erudite guy. and he can talk about classical literature, and he incorporated all of that into Star Trek 2, which is, even if you're not a fan of the franchise, I feel that if you really understand classical storytelling from a literary standpoint, you can find your way. I mean, Highlander is a very literary, the ideas of it, come from classic literature. It's very mythic, all the way back to, the ancient Greeks and the pantheon of gods, the Roman and Greek pantheon of gods. There's a lot of Highlander in that. And if you know these things, then you can make a great film out of it, I think. And that's what you need. You need to find a filmmaker. If they don't already love the franchise, then find a filmmaker that understands. I just don't think we have a lot of literary. We don't have men and women of letters that are becoming filmmakers, and I think that's problematic. And I think Highlander needs that. It needs either you love those kinds of things, or you're somebody that understands classical storytelling tropes, because otherwise, you need somebody special to bring something unique to a Highlander remake. Otherwise, you're going to get something like Total Recall, or you're going to get RoboCop, competently made films,
right?
But they've been mandated. It was a studio idea to hire people, so you're trying to work within this paradigm, but the paradigm overshadows what you as a creative person would bring to this, because the studio doesn't want you to mess with the formula that much.
Well, hopefully, I can't remember which one it was now, but whichever one of the directors that's taking this on, hopefully he has the butt that JJ doesn't have. So yeah, JJ says, I didn't like Star Trek. He didn't have the butt there that Nicholas Meyer had, which was,
right.
I didn't like Star Trek, but I got it. Which means, once he saw what it was, he's like, he knew it was Horatio Hornblower in space.
Right. And that was Gene Roddenberry, told him that too. Whereas J.J. Abrams fundamentally decided to turn Star Trek into Star Wars. In his own mind, he's like, I'm going to make this into something I like better than Star Trek. And I think that's why it didn't work.
Yeah, I think you're right there. Then Adam Wolford says there was an episode of Highlander, the series, where they were controlling country behind the doors. Also, Duncan fight the 3 of the 4 horsemen, and they were trying to destroy the world and set it back. Yeah, like I said, the series does go in some really strange place. Like, I fell out of it in the latter part, so I didn't even see the entire run. But no, that's what I was kind of saying earlier too, is that the series did a great job of expanding on the universe and the whole idea of, the Immortals being a part of a lot of historical moments, and just behind the scenes, almost like an Illuminati kind of thing. And they even lead up to that in the Endgame movie. So yeah, and I want to thank Dwight for becoming a member as well. Thank you for that. Let me see if there's any newer ones I can grab here real quick. We have another one from Dwight, who says, hail from EBN. Now the enemy of all immortal was done by Mario's mogul character. Mario's mogul character. Not sure what he means there.
Mario Van Peebles character?
Oh, maybe. Yeah, that could be. Well, yeah, he was. I don't know if he was. That was the whole life. If you're getting at what I'm saying, is like, yeah, I think they were setting up that there was a couple of different immortals that were kind of like the Kurgan that they knew they had to kind of watch out for, and that's why the better guys, or whatever you want to call them, were like getting ready for the final battle with them. But I'm going to run back to some earlier super chats here. Sean the Movie Man said, way back when, sorry about this, it's taking so long to get here, but we got to him. Highlander reboot, Henry Cavill being trained by his mentor Demi Lovato as he searches for Zendaya, who is the key to everything. It will be epic. I hope not. Oh Lord, I hope you're wrong there. Thanos 2024 says Cavill might make an effective Kurgan. Well, that's the thing. I know a lot of the outlets were saying they're not sure which party's playing yet. That could be a possibility, especially with price wise. Do you think that might be the case? They'd be using him as like a Kurgan type character, Robert? Or
absolutely. I mean, why not? It would be interesting playing against type like that. I think you could probably really chew the scenery to a point where it's a lot of fun.
I don't think you're wrong, but at the same time, I look at him and I see the Duncan MacLeod.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely.
So I'm like, and I know, like, the thing is with the series, and I brought this up a couple times now, is that series brought in a major female fan base to the Highlander franchise.
Oh yeah,
and I know they've paid attention to that fact. So I could be wrong. I wouldn't be surprised if he's the Kurgan, or a Kurgan-like character, but I would be less surprised if he's more like a Duncan MacLeod type character.
Yes.
That's what I think. Silver Nova says, the scene where it shows Heather grow old and die always gets me in the feels. I wish the modern movies could affect me that way. Yeah, it's one of those, especially with the music. The music really gets you with that scene. I don't know if that's part of it for you, Robert, but yeah.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And again, who would score? I mean, maybe if you went in a different direction, but I think that again, the movie's very operatic. And if you tried to make it too conventional, you miss what's fun about the original film. And I don't necessarily know how you could do that.
That's where I don't order if they just use the original film's music. Like I wouldn't be like, I'm like, all right, cool. That's why I didn't mind with Superman Returns. I'm like, that's where I thought, Brian was right with that. Like, yeah, use the original theme. Don't ignore it. It's so synonymous with Superman. Even if you weren't doing, a semi-sequel to the original films, I'd still be like, use that original theme. Why? Because it's Superman. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be connected. It's just the fact that it's there.
Yeah.
Enoch Mammon, if I could say that right, says, I apologize for calling your wife a bloated warthog, and I bid you good day. I guess that was the first scene they shot too. Was the drunken fight. Yeah. Yeah, that's the stuff that we love about the movie, though. RRTNZNZD. I don't know how you would say that out loud. Great chat, gents. Love this movie, but there really should have been only one soundtrack plus slightly ridiculous casting plus concept coalesced into something uniquely magic. Cheers. Oh yeah, that's very hard to argue. I think both Robert and Critical Drinker made that point several times that no, it's just one of those things. It's a perfect meld of everything. It was a perfect storm if you ever had one. That's for sure. And I don't know if you want to build on that at all, Robert, but
no, but I completely agree with that. What you just said too. I mean, it's a tough act to follow, but then again, we're acting like Highlander. I want to be clear. I don't think Highlander is like some A-list sacrosanct movie that should never be touched either.
That's kind of where I'm coming from. Yeah.
I mean, it's a B movie with some A-list production values, but make no mistake, it's a B movie. It's a pretty B movie, but it's certainly not some kind of movie that is beyond reproach. It is what it is. I mean, I think of it in the same breath as New Line's The Hidden from 1988, which is a very cool, low-budget New Line movie about, if you haven't seen The Hidden, you got to see The Hidden, but this rock and roll alien body swapping movie that I love. I think The Hidden's great for what it is.
Isn't Michael Ironside in that one too? No.
Michael Ironside is not in The Hidden, but Michael Nouri is, along with Kyle MacLachlan.
Okay, yeah.
And then Claudia Christian from Babylon 5 is in it. But I'm
blending it with Scanners, I think is what I'm doing.
Michael. Yeah. Oh my God. Scanners is peak Michael.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing is I'm blending it with Scanners. My bad.
We're going to do this the Scanner way. I'm going to suck your brain dry. Man, I love that movie.
No, that's my fault. Master Clockwork says, now hear me out. Gal Gadot as Ramirez. That's a funny question. Now, who would you put in a Ramirez role? That is a good question.
Well, you think about somebody like Antonio Banderas.
That's what I was thinking.
You come to mind, maybe like a younger Antonio Banderas, like a desperado Antonio Banderas, but find somebody along those lines. But again, it's such a strange.
He's perfect age now because Ramirez was older.
Oh yeah, no. But I mean, in his younger days, I love, and now he's perfect for that. But it's almost like he's too perfect for that. Like, of course you would cast him.
I think that's because everybody has said that too. They're like, who else would you get besides that? Especially considering the Zorro connection.
Right. Exactly. I mean, and you could even play off that. You could say that he was Zorro. He's an immortal. He was. So
there was that time when I was in Mexico hiding my face and fighting for good.
Yeah. And then I was desperado.
And then I was a desperado for a while.
Yeah, I was a mariachi. I carried my guns around and I put my sword away for a while. But I mean, but again, to me, then you're instead of remaking the movie, you're just recreating the movie. And I think what it needs is a new take. It needs a new reimagining of that central concept. And I think I don't know what that is, but I think that's what you would need.
That's where I've been coming from. And I think that's what the series initially did too. Sorry, Robert.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it needs more like that.
Yeah, and that's where I was coming from. It was like, no, I get it. Like, you're never going to be able to recreate that first movie ever. It's just not going to happen. But what you can do is something like what they did with the series, and that was a different take, a different kind of place. And they even used the Queen music, and they even incorporated some Kansas music and other stuff into the series as well. So they still carried on that whole idea of, the music mixed with the myth and all that kind of stuff. And then I apologize, I can't say it nearly as well as Andre, but she loves Adrian Paul in the Highlander series, as most women do and did. Right. That's why that series was very popular. So yeah. Let's see here. We got E.T. How do I say this? Etienne Ferlardo? Etienne? Okay. Yeah. Thank you for
that. Etienne Navarre from Ladyhawk.
Oh, well, thank you. Maybe they should use Highlander movie as a start of a new TV series and go Richard Gere for Ramirez. Well, there you go. So you're thinking a little bit more out of the box than what we were. There's an idea like a Richard Gere or a Harrison Ford type maybe in that role. That's not a bad idea at all.
No.
B-Man, I think, has got it, though. Danny Trejo as Ramirez. There you go.
Although, and somebody said in the chat, Javier Bardem.
Javier Bardem.
I mean, Danny Trejo, dude's almost 80.
I know, right?
I can't believe that. But
he's still,
he's the best.
He's awesome. All right, let's see here. Lizard Machine says, I bought a Connor MacLeod katana as an engagement gift let me rephrase that. I was bought a Connor MacLeod katana as an engagement gift by my fiance. Wife is gone, but I still have the sword. Prefer that anyway. There you go.
There you go. Yeah.
Well, some things don't last forever, but swords do. Mexican Iron Man, our good buddy, says, what a fantastic movie. Great roundtable and brilliant panelists. Thank you all for the time to do this panel. Question: if you had cast Henry as the lead, what Highlander plot would you tell? Well, I think we've kind of been covering that. I think Robert and I specifically you don't have to redo the original film. Just do something with the concept.
Right.
In a similar kind of situation. It doesn't have to be the same movie. I think that's the way I'd go too. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you have to do the idea of these immortals, but I also think that the idea of immortals, the prize is you get to be mortal. That's an idea that has been used over and over and over again. And I think that's a little anticlimactic in a way now, because we know it's coming and it's been used, like whether it's vampires wanting to be mortal or there's a great movie with Blake Lively called Age of Adeline that I really love. And it's about a woman that is immortal for a while and then she becomes mortal at the end. I mean, that idea is almost old hat. And I think maybe some kind of reimagining of that central concept is what's also needed. Well, I don't know what that is, but
you could even make that part of Connor's character, or the whatever Connor character stand-in you have, and that is that he just doesn't care what the prize is anymore, because you've been alive for so long. What difference does it make? Or you kind of make the prize this fugazi thing that it doesn't have to necessarily be there. I mean, like you said, we already know what that part was. Well, that's where you build the mystery on it in this new. You can make it a franchise this way if it actually works out, and that's where bringing somebody like Cavill in is a perfect, idea,
right?
And if you get the right people behind it, like you've been saying, Robert, but it could go the wrong way. I do see that happening. So
absolutely.
All right, I'm gonna grab any newer ones here I can, but I don't see any, and hopefully I didn't miss any, because I think we're getting close to being caught up. I've got a few more here in the back. Uber B-Man, speaking of, says the second film is worth a video unto itself, and it had these producers from Spain that, from my understanding, affecting its concept and execution. Yeah, I don't know if you came in late, but I kind of gave an overview of that. But we are part of the initial bringing on of this video, or however you want to put it, the inception of this whole panel kind of started with the idea that Andre had never seen the movies. And I'm like, how have you not seen them? I'm like, not only the movies, like stuff we're into, the behind the scenes crap on these movies is what Midnight's Edge is built on. So believe you me, there is a huge retrospective coming on the making of all these films because they all had nothing but nightmare productions. Each and every last one of them. Like, you talk about cursed movies, it's a miracle that any of these movies got made.
Right.
Especially the second one. That one will have its very own, like I said, each one will have its own special chapter. So, because like today I was trying to figure out where I'm at with part 3. There's been like 3 different cuts of that. And now each and every one of these movies has had multiple cuts and all that good stuff. So we'll definitely get into that. So hopefully you'll look forward to that. Ross Irving says, the thing is, Connor becomes absolutely out of touch with being immortal. When you see him watching we read that one. Okay. Jesse Miller said, we got that one. Full Metal Smile, we got that one. I think we're caught up then. Stubble McShave, we got that one. Okay, maybe there's a couple here we didn't miss. No, I don't think so. I think we're all caught up. So with that, let me make sure we didn't get any new ones in the meantime. And mods, that if I'd missed any more, please let me know. Because there could have been some that I missed in the jumping of the stream. Can I show the Poochie ending? We'd probably get a copyright claim, but I think it's on YouTube. You can find it. Just look for Highlander 2 alternate ending. And do you know what I'm talking about, Robert?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so for those who don't know, the original British ending of Highlander 2 had what I love to refer to as the Poochie ending. Since they come from the planet Zeist, all of a sudden, Connor gets this power where he's in the sky and he's talking to Virginia Madsen's character. He's like, come with me. And she's like, I can't. He's like, yes, you can. It's a kind of magic. And they get together in the sky in this really bad blue screen effect. And they just whisk away to the planet Zeist. So that's why I like to call it the Poochie ending. Because for those who know on The Simpsons, when they introduced Homer's character Poochie on Itchy and Scratchy, that's how they got rid of him. They're like, and Poochie went away to his home planet and was never seen again. Yeah. So anyway, that's the Poochie ending. You can find it out there. Just look for a Highlander British ending, I think, and you'll probably be able to find it. Harry Nice Guy says, give me Highlander meets William Wallace. Arr! Well, that's kind of what you got to do for the flashback scenes if you're doing it that way. So there you go. But we do know that Henry's getting in the Scottish spirit of things from his Instagram post. I don't know if you saw that, Robert. But yeah. So I think that's pretty much a done deal. Cedric Taylor says there are too many sequels. That I cannot argue with. That I will not argue with. And with that, I think we're going to wrap this up because I know you have some things you probably got to do, Robert, like your own show.
Yep.
And I want to thank you so much for hanging out with me, man. This has been so fun to talk Highlander.
Absolutely.
Any final thoughts on the movie or the possible upcoming reboot or anything else?
Well, I mean, look, as I said, I always go into everything wanting it to be great. I just think that this is, I hope they have a really good take on it, and that I think it needs more of a reimagining than it needs just another remake. So I'm curious to see how they're going to make this iteration of Highlander unique. So,
Jesse, I don't know why Andre hasn't modded Paulie yet. That's a good thing. Yeah, he's not here to do it, though. So we'll have to get him on the next one. So you did not have to send a super chat for that either, by the way, but thank you. And I know, Jesse, you're driving, so be careful. He's working today. So I want to thank you again, Robert, for your time. I want to thank Critical Drinker, who was here earlier. And just remember, kids, there can be only one. But maybe there's another one in the wings waiting for us. Who knows?